She wasn't rejected. That would have been easier to survive. Instead, the man she loved simply chose someone else. The entire Silverfang pack stood gathered beneath the ancient moon altar, where generations of alphas had crowned the women destined to stand beside them. Moonlight poured across the white stone platform. Hundreds of wolves filled the sacred clearing. Warriors stood shoulder to shoulder with farmers. Children sat on their parents' shoulders for a better view. The annual Luna Ascension ceremony was finally here. For 7 years, no one questioned who would receive the moon crown. Evelyn Frostmere. She had earned it long before anyone placed a title upon her. When famine had nearly destroyed the pack, she organized food stores until every family could eat. When illness spread through the villages, she walked from cottage to cottage carrying herbs instead of excuses. Every orphaned pup knew her embrace. Every grieving elder knew her patience. The people already called her their Luna. Tonight was only supposed to make it official. Standing a few steps behind Alpha Kieran Ashford, Evelyn smiled quietly as the High Elder lifted the silver moon crown with both hands. The ancient blessing began. Before the moon goddess, a sudden voice interrupted him. "Stop!" The clearing fell silent. The High Elder looked up in confusion. "My Alpha?" Kieran slowly turned away from Evelyn. His eyes searched the gathered crowd until they settled upon a beautifully dressed noblewoman standing among the honored guests, Lady Selene Thornvale. She stepped forward, clearly as surprised as everyone else. Kieran accepted the moon crown from the stunned elder. His hands tightened briefly around the polished silver. "The future of Silverfang," he said carefully, "depends on stronger alliances." Murmurs swept through the crowd. The Thornvale family has pledged warriors, trade routes, and protection for generations to come. His voice remained calm, almost rehearsed. "For the good of our people, I name Lady Selene Thornvale as Luna of Silverfang." He gently lowered the moon crown onto Selene's head. The world seemed to stop. No one applauded. No one celebrated. The silence hurt far more than shouting ever could. Evelyn stood perfectly still. She felt hundreds of eyes turning toward her, waiting. Would she cry? Would she scream? Would she demand an explanation? Instead, she lowered her gaze, then stepped forward. Lady Selene looked stricken. I'm so sorry." Evelyn offered her a small, genuine smile. "This isn't your fault." She carefully adjusted the edge of Selene's ceremonial cloak, where it had slipped from one shoulder. The simple gesture made several women in the crowd wipe away tears. Kieran finally faced her. His voice was quieter now. "Evelyn, I hope one day you'll understand." She searched his face for the man who had once promised they would build the future together. She found only an alpha, trying to convince himself he had done the right thing. "I understand," she said softly. "You made the choice you believed your kingdom needed." The words were kind, but something inside them sounded like goodbye. She bowed respectfully to the newly crowned Luna, then turned away from the moon altar. No dramatic farewell, no accusations, just quiet footsteps disappearing into the crowd. Only one elderly healer noticed that Evelyn never once looked back, because people only look back when they still hope something will change. That night, while the pack celebrated its new Luna with music and dancing that echoed through the village until midnight, Evelyn stood alone inside the small house that had once been prepared for her future. She looked down at the silver mate bracelet circling her wrist. For a long moment, she simply held it. Then, with trembling fingers, she reached for the clasp. 3 months later, no one in the mountain village knew the name Evelyn Frostmere. To them, she was simply Ava, the quiet healer who arrived with a worn satchel, an old wool cloak, and a kindness that never seemed to run out. She never spoke about where she had come from. The villagers eventually stopped asking. People with gentle eyes usually carried painful stories. They respected her silence. Life in the mountains was simple. Every morning, Eva climbed narrow forest trails, gathering herbs before the sun reached the valley. She treated fevers, delivered babies, set broken bones, accepted payment only when families could spare it. Sometimes she returned home with fresh bread. Other days, with nothing more than grateful smiles. Either was enough. The peaceful routine lasted until the autumn storm arrived. Rain hammered the rooftops throughout the night. The river swelled beyond its banks. Just before dawn, frantic voices echoed through the village square. "We found someone. Under the bridge. He's still breathing." Eva grabbed her healer's bag and ran. The old stone bridge had partially collapsed beneath the force of the floodwaters. Several villagers struggled to pull an unconscious man from the tangled wreckage. His clothes were soaked with blood. Deep sword wounds crossed his shoulders and ribs. Dark veins spread beneath his pale skin. Poison. One frightened villager stepped backward. "Don't touch him. That venom kills within hours. We'll only waste supplies." Eva ignored every warning. She knelt beside the stranger and gently pressed 2 fingers against his neck. A weak pulse answered. "Help me lift him." No one moved. They were afraid, so she did it herself, with enough determination, and eventually enough guilty consciences following her example. The wounded traveler was carried into the village clinic. For 8 days, Eva barely slept. She crushed herbs into bitter medicine, changed blood-soaked bandages, cooled his fever with damp cloths through endless nights. Twice, his breathing became so shallow she believed he was slipping away. Twice, she refused to let him. "You don't even know his name," the village elder said one evening. Eva stirred another pot of medicine. "I know he's alive. That's enough." On the morning of the 9th day, the stranger finally opened his eyes. Gray, sharp, far too alert for someone who had nearly died. He studied the unfamiliar room before looking at the woman replacing the bandage around his shoulder. His voice came out rough. "You should have left me." Eva didn't even glance up. "I hear that from stubborn patients all the time." He frowned. "I mean it. So do I." She tied the fresh bandage with practiced hands. "If you're going to say dramatic things, at least try being original." For the first time in days, the stranger laughed. It hurt enough to make him regret it immediately. He winced. Eva handed him a cup of bitter tea. "There, that's a more reasonable expression." He accepted the cup. "You don't seem impressed that I survived." She smiled faintly. "I spent 8 days making sure you did. I assumed success was the expected outcome." He stared at her for a long moment. Most people treated survival as a miracle. She treated it as unfinished work. He found that strangely comforting. Outside the clinic, life returned to its usual rhythm. Children chased chickens through muddy streets. Smoke curled lazily from cottage chimneys. The mountains looked peaceful once more, until the distant sound of horses echoed through the valley. Not one horse, not 10, hundreds. The ground trembled beneath the approaching riders. Villagers rushed outside. Royal banners appeared through the morning mist, and every soldier rode toward the small clinic where Eva had quietly saved the life of a man whose true identity no one had yet imagined. The thunder of hooves grew louder until the entire mountain village seemed to tremble. Children stopped playing. Shopkeepers stepped into the street. Even the village elder looked uneasy as hundreds of armored riders surrounded the small clinic. The banners they carried were unlike any the villagers had ever seen. A black wolf beneath a silver moon, the royal crest of the Nightbane Kingdom. The lead rider dismounted before the clinic door. His armor bore the marks of countless battles, but his movements were controlled, disciplined. He looked less like a soldier and more like a man desperately hoping he wasn't too late. Captain Roland, commander of the Alpha King's Royal Guard. He pushed open the clinic door. The recovering traveler was already sitting upright on the edge of the bed, calmly fastening the last strap of a fresh bandage. Roland froze. For one heartbeat, he simply stared. Then he dropped to one knee. Every soldier outside followed instantly. "Your Majesty." The words echoed through the valley. The villagers looked at one another in confusion. "Your Majesty?" Ava turned slowly toward the man she had spent 8 sleepless nights keeping alive. He sighed, almost apologetically. "I was hoping to leave before this happened." She blinked. "You?" He gave her a small smile. "My name is Lucian Nightbane, Alpha King of the Nightbane Kingdom." Silence filled the little clinic. The elderly baker nearly dropped the basket he had been carrying. A young shepherd whispered a prayer beneath his breath. Eva simply looked at Lucian, then down at the unfinished bandage she was holding. Finally, she shrugged. "Well, that certainly explains why your body has so many scars." For a moment, no one moved. Then Lucian laughed. A genuine laugh. Captain Roland stared in disbelief. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard his king laugh like that. Roland stepped forward, relief written across every line of his face. "The kingdom believed you were dead." Lucian glanced toward Eva. "I almost was." His voice softened. "If she had arrived, even 1 hour later, you would be crowning someone else." Roland turned toward the quiet healer. Without hesitation, he bowed deeply. "The Nightbane Kingdom owes you a debt it can never fully repay." Ava looked almost embarrassed. "I only did what any healer should." Lucian quietly disagreed. "No, you did what everyone else was too frightened to do." His words carried no exaggeration, only gratitude. By afternoon, the royal physicians had arrived with fresh medicines and supplies. They insisted Lucian continue recovering at the capital. Before leaving, he walked slowly through the village square. The people who had feared him only hours earlier now waved shyly as he passed. He stopped beside Ava's small herb garden. "You've built something good here." She smiled. "They built it. I just planted a few herbs." Lucian looked at her for a thoughtful moment, then reached into his coat and removed a small silver seal bearing the Nightbane crest. He placed it gently in her hand. "If you ever need anything," he closed her fingers around it. "My gates will always remain open." Eva nodded politely. "Thank you, Your Majesty." She watched the royal procession disappear into the mountains, then returned to trimming lavender as though nothing extraordinary had happened. The villagers teased her for days. "You saved a king." She only smiled. He was just another patient. She truly believed their paths had ended there. But 3 months later, while the first snow quietly settled across the mountain rooftops, someone knocked gently on the clinic door. Standing outside was Lucian. No royal armor, no crown, only a basket filled with rare healing herbs. Evelyn opened the clinic door expecting another patient. Instead, she found Lucian standing on the porch with snowflakes resting across his dark hair. He carried a wicker basket overflowing with rare mountain herbs. "I was passing through," he said. She looked beyond him. There wasn't another road for 50 miles. "You took quite a detour." The corner of his mouth lifted. "So I've been told." She stepped aside. "Come in before you freeze." He obeyed without another word. That became the beginning of a quiet routine. Every few weeks, Lucian returned. Sometimes he brought herbs that only grew in the northern cliffs. Sometimes books for the little school beside the clinic. Sometimes warm blankets before winter storms. He never arrived with a royal procession, never announced himself, never expected anyone to bow. To the villagers, He slowly stopped being the Alpha King. He became the tall traveler who could repair broken fences almost as well as he split firewood. One afternoon, Evelyn found him on the clinic roof, replacing damaged shingles. She folded her arms. "Does your kingdom know where its king is?" Lucian hammered another nail into place. "I left instructions. For repairing roofs? For ruling." She laughed. The sound surprised them both. It had been months since laughter had come so naturally. Later that week, a group of village children gathered outside the clinic after lessons. Lucien sat beneath the old oak tree with an open storybook resting across his knee. He changed his voice for every character. The children laughed whenever the grumpy old wolf appeared. Even Evelyn paused while grinding herbs just to listen. When the story ended, little Mira tugged on Lucian's sleeve. "Will you come back next month?" He glanced toward Evelyn before answering. "If your healer doesn't mind another visitor." Every pair of young eyes turned toward her. She pretended to think carefully. "I suppose we could tolerate you." The children cheered. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The village bridge washed away during heavy rain. Before anyone could organize repairs, Lucian quietly arrived with lumber and spent 3 days working beside the local carpenters. He never mentioned who paid for the supplies. He never accepted thanks. One evening, after the bridge reopened, Evelyn found him sitting alone beside the river, watching the current drift past. "You don't have to keep doing this." Lucian looked up. "Doing what?" "Finding reasons to come here." He was silent for a moment, then answered honestly, "I know." She waited. "I come because I like who I become when I'm here." The words settled gently between them. There were no grand declarations, no impossible promises, just simple truth. Evelyn realized something unexpected. He never made her feel as though she owed him anything. He wasn't trying to impress her. He simply kept showing up, again and again and again. Not because he expected her affection, because consistency was simply part of who he was. Weeks turned into months. Without realizing it, Evelyn began listening for hoofbeats. Whenever the weather changed, she caught herself setting an extra cup beside the kettle. She found rare herbs and wondered whether Lucian had ever used them. The realization frightened her, not because she was falling in love, because she had started looking forward to someone's return again. One evening, as she stood watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, she heard familiar footsteps behind her. She smiled before she even turned around. The footsteps stopped a few feet behind her. Evelyn turned, already expecting to see Lucien carrying another basket of herbs or a stack of books for the village children. Instead, her smile disappeared. Kieran. The name barely rose above a whisper. The former Alpha looked older than she remembered. Not in years, in regret. The confidence that had once defined him had been replaced by a quiet weariness. His shoulders seemed heavier, and the silver streaks beginning to appear near his temples spoke of countless sleepless nights. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Finally, Kieran spoke. "I found you." Evelyn folded her hands in front of her. "It seems you did." Silence stretched between them. The mountain breeze carried the scent of pine through the valley. "I've been searching for almost 2 years." "I know." "You knew?" She nodded. "Travelers talk. I heard stories about an Alpha asking every healer, every merchant, every village, if they'd seen a woman wearing an old gray cloak." Kieran lowered his eyes. "I should have searched sooner." "You searched when you were ready." His expression tightened. "The alliance failed." She said nothing. "Celine left." His voice held no bitterness. "The Thornvale family withdrew their support after the neighboring packs broke their agreements." He gave a hollow laugh. "I traded away the person who stood beside me for a future that disappeared anyway." Evelyn looked at him quietly. There had been a time when hearing those words would have shattered her. Now, they simply made her sad. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know. I was afraid. I know. I thought I was saving the pack. I know." Each answer came without anger, without satisfaction, only truth. Kieran took one hesitant step forward. "I made the biggest mistake of my life." Before Evelyn could answer, another familiar sound echoed across the path. Hoof beats. Lucian dismounted before reaching the clinic, leading his horse the rest of the way, as he always did. A crate of medicine rested across the saddle. He noticed Kieran immediately. His expression never changed. No hostility, no possessiveness, only calm awareness. "Good afternoon," Lucian said politely. Kieran studied the man standing before him. There was no royal cloak, no crown, just a simple shirt rolled to the elbows, hands roughened from repairing fences and chopping wood beside villagers. Yet somehow, his quiet confidence filled the entire space. Lucian walked to Evelyn first. "I brought the fever remedies you requested." She smiled. "Thank you. I also found those rare blue mountain flowers. They're drying in the saddlebags." Their conversation was ordinary, comfortable. It carried the ease of two people who had shared countless quiet days together. Kieran finally understood. Lucian wasn't standing beside Evelyn because of duty. He was there because that was where he had chosen to be. Lucian turned toward him. "I imagine the two of you have things to discuss." He stepped back, not between them, beside Evelyn, close enough that she would never feel alone, far enough that she would never feel pressured. He looked only at her. "What do you want?" Not, "What should happen?" Not, "What do I deserve?" Only, "What do you want?" For the first time in years, Evelyn realized no one had asked her that question before making a decision about her life. She looked from the man who had once chosen a kingdom over her to the man who had quietly chosen her without asking for anything in return. In this time, the choice would belong entirely to her. Evelyn didn't answer Lucian's question that day, not because she was uncertain, because some choices deserved to be made without the weight of an audience. Kieran understood. He bowed his head once. "I'll leave tomorrow. If you ever wish to speak again..." He stopped himself. For years, he had asked her to understand what he needed. He would not ask for anything now. "You know where to find me." Evelyn nodded politely. "I wish you peace. Nothing more, nothing less." Kieran looked at Lucian. For the first time, there was no rivalry in his eyes, only painful acceptance. "Take care of her," Lucian answered simply. "I intend to." The next morning, Kieran rode away from the mountain village. He never looked back, because this time, he knew she wasn't the one leaving. He was. Months passed. Life settled once more into its gentle rhythm. The clinic grew larger. More healers arrived to learn from Evelyn. Lucian continued visiting, though no longer pretending he happened to be passing through. One evening, while they harvested herbs beneath the fading sunlight, Evelyn smiled. "You finally stopped inventing excuses." Lucian chuckled. "I ran out." She laughed. "So you did." He looked at her quietly. "I come because you're my favorite part of the journey." The words were spoken so naturally that they settled into her heart before she could think about them. There was no pressure, only truth. Nearly a year later, leaders from every neighboring kingdom gathered inside the Nightbane capital. The great hall shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers and silver banners. It was coronation day. The royal priest approached Lucian, carrying the ancient moon crown. Every noble expected the ceremony to begin. Instead, Lucian raised his hand. "Wait." The hall fell silent. He stepped away from the throne, past ministers, past generals, past visiting rulers. He walked directly toward Evelyn. She stood among the honored guests, wearing a simple silver gown, that reflected the moonlight pouring through the cathedral windows. Confused whispers spread through the crowd. Lucian stopped before her. He didn't reach for the crown. He reached for her hand. "I don't need a queen, because tradition says I should have one." His voice carried through the silent hall. "I need the woman who taught me that compassion can be stronger than power." He smiled gently. "And unlike the day your heart was broken, I choose you first." No one moved. No one dared interrupt. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes, not because another crown waited for her, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't being chosen after someone else. She wasn't replacing another woman. She wasn't solving a political problem. She wasn't the practical decision. She was simply the first choice. Lucian held out his hand. No expectation, no pressure, only invitation. Evelyn placed her hand in his. "I've waited a very long time." Her voice trembled with quiet joy. "To know what it feels like to be chosen without having to earn my place." A smile softened Lucian's face. "You never had to earn it." The royal priest stepped forward again. Only then did Lucian accept the moon crown. Moments later, he placed it gently upon Evelyn's head before the entire kingdom. The great hall erupted in applause. Among the crowd stood one silent figure. Kieran. He watched without bitterness, without resentment, only with the painful understanding that the greatest loss of his life had not been the woman standing beside another king. It had been the moment he failed to stand beside her when she needed him most. And somehow, seeing her finally chosen first made even his regret feel worth carrying. Kieran returned to Silverfang alone. The journey home felt longer than the one that had taken him to Evelyn. Not because of the distance, because every mile forced him to remember the woman who had once walked beside him without ever asking for more than honesty. When the gates of Silverfang opened, the pack welcomed their alpha with respectful bows. For the first time, Kieran noticed something he had ignored for years. Many of the women lowered their eyes before speaking. Some hesitated before offering opinions. Others quietly stepped aside whenever powerful families approached. He wondered how many of them had learned, just as Evelyn had, that loyalty often received less protection than political advantage. That evening, he summoned the elders, the same council chamber where he had once announced Celine as Luna stood silent once more. The High Elder frowned. "My alpha, what requires such urgency?" Kieran remained standing. "No Luna of Silverfang will ever again lose her place because of politics." The room erupted in confused murmurs. He continued, "From this day forward, no alpha may replace a bonded mate to secure alliances or satisfy noble families. Any challenge to a Luna's position must be judged by the full council and the Moon Priestess, not by one man's fear." Several elders exchanged uneasy glances. One finally spoke. "But those traditions have existed for generations." Kieran looked directly at him. "So have mistakes." No one argued after that. Within weeks, the reforms became law. Young women throughout the pack whispered about the changes with cautious hope. For the first time, many believed their loyalty could not simply be traded away. Months later, during the harvest gathering, Kieran stood before the entire pack. The same clearing, the same moon altar, the same place where Evelyn's heart had broken. "I owe this pack the truth," he said. His voice carried across the silent crowd. "I believed leadership meant sacrificing one person for many." He paused. "I was wrong. The strongest kingdoms are not built by asking faithful hearts to compete for a place they have already earned." There were no excuses, no attempts to rewrite history, only accountability. Far away in the Nightbane kingdom, word of the reforms eventually reached Evelyn. She folded the letter quietly after reading it. Lucian looked up from the book he had been reading to a group of village children. Good news. She smiled gently. Necessary news. He waited. She handed him the letter. After reading it, he returned it without comment. Are you happy? Evelyn thought for a long moment. I'm relieved. You forgave him. I forgave him a long time ago. She looked through the open window, where children laughed while gathering wildflowers. But forgiveness doesn't always mean returning. Lucian nodded. I know. That was all. He never asked whether she regretted her decision, never wondered if she missed her old life, because he understood something Kieran had learned too late. Love wasn't proven by convincing someone to stay. It was proven by making them feel safe enough that staying became their own choice. Years passed peacefully. One spring morning, a group of young Luna candidates arrived at the Royal Gardens, seeking Queen Evelyn's guidance. They had traveled from distant packs, each carrying different fears about leadership, duty, and love. As Evelyn welcomed them with warm smiles, Lucian watched quietly from beneath an old oak tree. He smiled to himself. The woman who had once believed she wasn't enough had become the example every future Luna hoped to follow. Every spring, young Luna candidates traveled across the continent to visit Queen Evelyn. Some came from powerful kingdoms. Others came from tiny mountain packs few people had ever heard of. They arrived carrying journals filled with questions about leadership, duty, and love. But there was always one question they asked before returning home. Your Majesty, how did you find the courage to leave? Evelyn never answered immediately. She would pour each visitor a cup of warm herb tea before leading them into the palace gardens, where wildflowers grew more freely than carefully trimmed roses. The answer is simpler than people expect, she would finally say. I didn't leave because another woman was chosen. She smiled gently. I left because I finally understood that love should never feel like a competition. The young women always fell silent. Many lowered their eyes. Some quietly wiped away tears because they recognized something of themselves in those words. Lucian often watched those conversations from a respectful distance. He never interrupted. He never answered for Evelyn. Her voice had been ignored once before. He would never allow that to happen again. One evening, after the last visitors had departed, the two of them walked through the palace gardens beneath a brilliant full moon, the same moon that had witnessed Evelyn's greatest heartbreak years earlier. Lucienne reached for her hand. I've been thinking, she smiled. That usually means you're about to say something important. He laughed softly. Do you know the best decision I ever made? She looked at him curiously. Becoming king? He shook his head. Surviving that bridge long enough for a stubborn healer to find me. She laughed. You were an impossible patient. I still am. He squeezed her hand gently. The best decision I ever made was choosing you before the world had the chance to doubt you. Evelyn's eyes filled with quiet tears. Not tears of grief, tears of gratitude, because she finally understood something that had taken years to learn. The right love never asks you to prove why you deserve it. It simply welcomes you home. Far away, in the Silverfang Pack, Alpha Kieran continued honoring the promise he had made. Above the council hall, carved into white stone for every future Alpha to read, were the words he had chosen himself. The greatest leaders never ask loyal hearts to compete for a place that should already be theirs. Young Alphas stopped before that inscription, before taking their vows. Older leaders brought their heirs to read it aloud. Kieran never removed it. He wanted every generation after him to remember that one fearful decision could wound a faithful heart for years. History remembered Evelyn in many ways. Some called her the healer who saved a king. Others remembered her as the queen who transformed compassion into the greatest strength of an empire. But the title she treasured most came from ordinary wolves. They simply called her the queen who chose herself. Years later, when children asked how she became queen, Evelyn would smile and point toward the night sky. I didn't become queen because someone gave me a crown. I became queen the day I stopped begging for a place in someone else's future. And everything beautiful happened after that. The woman who disappeared the night her mate crowned another Luna never returned to reclaim what she had lost. Instead, she discovered a life where she never had to compete for love, question her worth, or earn her place, because the Alpha King who found her didn't rescue her from heartbreak. He simply loved her in a way that made heartbreak impossible to mistake for love ever again.